Thank you for watching this video. In celebration of the release of Peaky Blinders to Immortal Man, today we'll be doing a review and summary of the first 6 seasons of the TV show produced by BBC, followed by a review and summary of the movie Peaky Blinders to Immortal Man, and we'll end with kind of my analysis and takeaways from the series as a whole. Now, I'm trying a different audio setup this time, so hopefully this helps with the audio quality a little bit. Unfortunately, I still haven't properly set up the subtitles, but I think the YouTube auto captions generally did a pretty good job for my previous videos, so please feel free to turn those on if you need. And let's get right into it. But first things first, spoiler alert. I'm not really going to go into too much details of the plot, but then there will be a bit of spoilers inevitably here and there, so proceed with caution. Now, the story is set in post-World War I Britain in the industrial town of Birmingham, located in the Midlands, and it follows the story of the Shelby family, who are of Irish and Gypsy descent and operate the crime gang known as the Peaky Blinders. Now, to introduce you to the characters. Firstly, there's the main character, Thomas Shelby, portrayed by Cillian Murphy. He's a ruthless opportunist who's enigmatic and cunning, and he's really the de facto patriarch of the Shelby family because he's the most brainsy one. And then there's the eldest brother, Arthur, who is towards the rightmost of your screen. He's a stronger fighter, but he's also a bit more simple-minded. I think he's really a fascinating character who gets a lot of character development. He's violent and bad at really controlling his impulses, but at the same time he's not a vicious man by nature. And I think his struggles and his growth will find a really strong emotional anchor for the series as a whole. And there's also the younger and brash brother known as John Shelby. I also like to highlight these two characters. Firstly, there's Ada, who's the younger sister. She's a communist by heart and she really does not condone her brother's actions. And there's also Aunt Polly, who's an extremely rich character and a very strong female leader. She's a calm mind and an emotional anchor for Tommy, and as the series itself puts it, she is kind of like the internal crutch for Tommy. Now on to the overall summary. So firstly, in Season 1, we start the story with a misplaced shipment of military guns that gives the opportunity for the Peaky Blinders, the titular local gang based out of Birmingham. The name actually comes from like the hats that they wear, where they actually hide a small knife within the rims of the hat, and they use that to attack their enemies, and which is why they're called the Peaky Blinders. Take this opportunity to kind of increase their profile, right? They eventually grow and overthrow a bigger regional gang and gain control over the Midlands of Britain as a whole. This scene in particular is this very famous meme scene where it's like go home to your families, and it's near the end of Season 1. And importantly, in Season 1, Tommy also meets Grace, who was initially sent to infiltrate the gang as a spy by the dirty-handed police inspector Campbell. But she soon becomes the love of Tommy's life as she's the only person who is really able to draw his affectionate and gentle side after he came back from the war. Now in Season 2, we mostly follow the expansion of the Peaky Blinders into London and rise to national significance. And also we see them cross paths with the Italian Mafia. Season 3 is about Tommy's attempts to grow the Shelby brand internationally, where we see him have to deal with the Russians and members of the religious oligarchy. Importantly in the season, Grace also gets killed halfway through in what Tommy believes to be due to a curse. Now, I think the tone of the series takes a slightly darker turn from here on, whereas previously we see Tommy and Peaky Blinders really in the ascendancy. From now on we can really see any character might actually die. I think this season is the weaker of the seasons because I think there's just a little bit too much going on and the story structure is a little bit more loose. By contrast, I think Season 4 is a much stronger season. We get introduced to the character of Luca Changretta, who is portrayed by Adrian Brody, who I believe really just does a fantastic role in bringing this character to life. He's the son of an Italian mafia boss that the Peaky Blinders previously crossed paths with, and from the get-go he kills John Shelby, the younger brother. And I think from a plot point, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense because the character of John Shelby didn't get too much time to shine previously, and then he was really quite alike to Arthur Shelby's character. I think that actually really helped outline the kind of viciousness and the deadliness of Luca Changretta as a character. The story structure is just brilliant because there's a very clear central line to follow, the tension is also brilliant, and Luca is just such a dynamic and interesting villain. Season 5 again I think is a slightly weaker season because it mostly plays as setup for Season 6. Tommy begins his ventures into politics and he gets elected as the Labour MP for Birmingham, whereby he has to deal with Oswald Mosley, who is actually a historical character and a founder of the British Union of Fascists. Here I might have intentionally chose a slightly worse picture of him. I think the choice to cast Sam Claflin in the role is actually a very interesting one because Sam Claflin is obviously an extremely handsome man, but the historical Oswald Mosley is not quite like that. But he also had this kind of unique charisma and suave to him, and a bit of grittiness that I think gets lost a little bit in the casting of Sam Claflin, but obviously Sam Claflin still does a brilliant job as the character. Season 6 unfortunately coincides with the untimely passing of Helen McRory, who is the actress who portrayed Aunt Polly. As a result, they had to write out her character, so she was killed off screen by the IRA. to serve as a catalyst for her son Michael, who was introduced earlier as a deceitful character, to fully turn evil. Importantly, in the season, we also get introduced to Duke Shelby, who's the son of Tommy. Now, in the end, Tommy manages to kill Michael and get revenge for Aunt Polly, and he takes this as an opportunity to hand off his legacy and fade out. I think overall they dealt with the circumstance pretty well, and this served as a fitting farewell for the entire TV show. On to my review of the whole TV show. It's interesting to see that the IMDb ratings actually didn't fully agree with me, so do leave a comment if you have like a different point of view or kind of what your thoughts on this are. I felt that Season 3 and Season 5 were really the weaker seasons of the show, but as you can see from the ratings, on average they actually did pretty well. But I'm glad to see that they also agree with me that Season 4 was the strongest of all the seasons. Overall in general, the use of music throughout the show is just brilliant. The grasp on the tension and atmosphere throughout the show is also very, very well executed. The show is also extremely stylish. You might have heard before how kind of the characters throughout Peaky Blinders are all really well dressed, but it's not just that. I think overall the show is very visually stunning. A lot of it was shot on practical sets, and yes, the characters are extremely well designed as well. In terms of character development, we do get a lot of time to sit with the characters. We see them interact in a lot of different situations and circumstances, but I would say that there isn't necessarily a lot of evolution for the characters. Like, the core nature of what they are don't really change, but in terms of being really just able to sit and understand kind of like the characters as a complete individual, we do get a lot of time to do that, and that part is also very interesting for me. However, I would say that part of it leads to the pacing of the show being a little bit slow. Obviously, UK shows in general are a little bit slower in pacing, but a lot of the times in the build-up it takes a little bit too much time, and I think the resolution probably feels a little bit more hastened as a result. Peaky Blinders is able to get away with it because of just how visually stunning it is and how well executed the other elements of it are, and obviously overall it is still a very good show. Now on to the movie. Part of the experience of the show is not knowing what exactly is going on. A lot of onus is actually on the audience to figure things out. The show really doesn't bother to kind of explain why characters are in a particular circumstance, or a lot of the historical context of it, or the kind of hidden mechanisms behind why certain characters behave in a certain way. You kind of have to feel it for yourself and kind of fill in the blanks yourself, which I think is actually an interesting problem, given that now it is a Netflix movie, although I know it's also produced with the BBC, because Netflix has this thing called the second screen rule, which a lot of people really felt came to light for the season finale of Stranger Things, but it's just kind of guidelines that Netflix has, that any show that Netflix makes has to follow the principle where you expect the audience to watch it on a second screen and not be fully focused. So they really want the story to be kind of really well explained and really detailed, and obviously Peaky Blinders before doesn't really bother to do that. There are certain elements of it where you can kind of see the influence come through. You have this scene in the movie where, by contrast, in season 6 of the TV show, you get just thrown into Miquelon Island, and it doesn't explain why the characters are there. The historical context you kind of have to go find out for yourself. There are also scenes of where Thomas Shelby is writing his own autobiography, so he narrates a little bit and kind of explains the story a little bit, but overall I wouldn't say that that is kind of too much of a problem. It doesn't feel over the top. Now, in terms of the story, it actually talks about his son, Duke Shelby, who is now portrayed by Barry Keoghan, who I also believe does a brilliant job in the role. He kind of does things a little bit too extreme, and that ended up leading to the death of Ada, Tommy's sister. So Tommy is kind of forced to come back and kind of deal with the situation. My review of the movie is there are certain elements of it that I didn't really like. So firstly, the character of Arthur Shelby, who I mentioned before I believe is a brilliant character. In the movie it says that Tommy actually killed Arthur because he didn't want to deal with his problems anymore, which I felt like was an uncharacteristic thing for Tommy to do. I also regret not being able to see kind of Arthur deal with the circumstances and being present in the story, although I do recognize that if Arthur was kind of still alive, it probably means that Duke Shelby doesn't get that much of room to play and lead to kind of all the misfortunes and mistakes in the following. There's also the introduction of Rebecca Ferguson's character, who was a gypsy witch. I didn't really see the point of why they had to introduce a character like that. I know that in the plot structure wise she serves as a kind of catalyst of a lot of the things going on, but I feel like there could have been other ways of doing it without having to kind of give that time and space to a new character that we weren't previously familiar with. There's also a character of Finn Shelby, who's actually the youngest sibling, who doesn't really play too big of a role throughout the TV seasons, but actually at the end, in season 6, part of Duke Shelby's ascendancy was because he outcasted Finn Shelby, because Finn Shelby did something that betrayed the family. And in that moment, Finn Shelby said that, "I will come for you, Duke," which makes it very weird that in the movie, now that Duke Shelby is kind of like the centerpiece of the Peaky Blinders after Tommy had left, Finn Shelby didn't really do anything about it. Finn's character was just not in the movie at all. So I felt like in terms of a plot perspective, there were a lot of loose ends that weren't really tied up. There was also the existence of Anya Taylor-Joy's character that was introduced in season 5 and 6 of the TV show that didn't appear at all here, and wasn't really kind of addressed at all. In terms of Oswald Mosley, I actually realized that historically speaking, Oswald Mosley would have been jailed during this time, so it actually makes sense that he didn't appear even though he wasn't killed off. My overall review of the movie. In general, I still found it to be a thoroughly entertaining and a good time. Visually, it does not sacrifice anything at all. It's also still extremely cleanly executed. I think the new introductions of Barry Keoghan and Tim Roth also did an amazing job. However, in general, I find the pacing to be slightly off. It takes almost half the movie to explain why Tommy Shelby needs to come back and deal with the circumstance. And it means we didn't really get that much build up to the tension and the atmosphere in the central conflict. It also means we don't really get that much space for character development. Overall, I would give it a solid 6.5 out of 10. There are also certain elements of the plot points that I've hoped would have been dealt with differently, but I registered that this might be a personal bias. So if you have watched the movie, leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. I would love to have a discussion on this. But in general, I still found this movie to be a good time and a good watch. On to the part that you've all been truly waiting for, which is my unique and insightful analysis and takeaways from the series as a whole. I'd like to begin with Tommy Shelby. Obviously, Tommy Shelby is one of the most famous characters in television history. There have been endless analysis of his psyche and his character, so I won't really dive into that. But one thing I think people wouldn't really pick up on, and in my own reading I think it's a very prominent feature of his character, is even though Tommy Shelby is really a socialist at heart, he's actually the living embodiment of capitalism. He's always about this next big thing, do this, get there, and then get off, right? But in real life, it's really not that simple. You always think you can stop and walk away, but there's always going to be this next opportunity that haunts you and that comes around, and if you stop, you feel like you get overtaken by other people in certain aspects. This non-stop pursuit ultimately leads to Tommy not being able to spend enough time with his family and loved ones. And as an audience, we are really clear and in present mind and recognize the downsides and the downfall of his character. In the end, Tommy Shelby himself says that his relationship with the people around him has just been boiled down to money. I think this should really call for us to reflect in our lives how these kind of circumstances really happen to us as well. We always think that there's this next thing that I must do, there's this next opportunity that I cannot pass out on. And it's always until too late that we recognize the sacrifices that we've made along the way. I also really enjoyed the inclusion of Michael's character. I think Michael in many ways is kind of echoing Arthur's character as well. He serves as kind of the canary in the coal mine and the litmus test of the downsides and downfall of the morality in the situation. It's a reminder that kind of even if we enter into these circumstances with an innocent heart, ultimately we don't really get out of it clean and easy. Which brings me to really what I believe to be the central motif of the show, which is actions have consequences, that everything is a consequence of something that we have done before. This is in part especially present with Tommy Shelby and the Shelby family in general, who are World War I veterans. They come back traumatized with PTSD and shell shock, and what they end up doing is they have to resort to a life of crime, they resort to a life of ruthlessness because that is what life has taught them to have to do in order to survive. I think this is in contrast to the characters of Esme and Linda, who are the wives of John and Arthur Shelby. Now, these two characters, I think, in the show are portrayed in a somewhat annoying and very selfish light, not too indifferent to how Skylar is portrayed in Breaking Bad. And I think the difference of them, and let's say, for example, Ada Shelby, who also does not condone her brother's actions, Ada recognizes that ultimately she is a beneficiary of her brother's actions. That these actions also have consequences, that you cannot just take the profit and benefits of the wealth and fame or the ruthlessness, but not have to deal with the consequences afterwards. Esme and Linda are really about, oh, why don't we just get out now, but at the end, it always come back to bite you. Now, I'll also admit that Alfie Solomons is a character I don't really get. So Alfie Solomons is a Jewish mob boss portrayed by Tom Hardy. Now, firstly, this really reminds us of how many brilliant actors there are really in this series. Alfie is a character that kind of constantly betrays Tommy, but Tommy also still always kind of comes back to him and trusts him with certain important aspects. And I'll admit that I don't really understand this dynamic between the two characters. In one way, obviously they understand each other, they're very much also mirrors of each other, but like if I were Tommy, I would not trust this man like ever again in my life. Lastly, there's also the rise of the British Union of Fascists and fascism. Now, season 5 of the show was commissioned in 2016 and aired in 2019, so it's very clear kind of what the design of the plot of that season 5 and season 6 was echoing to in our real life. And I think this really goes to show how history is often a cycle. The rise of fascism in the UK in the show was portrayed as kind of an answer to the 1929 stock market crash. Even in the show itself, it says how everything is a cycle, how politics is a cycle. And this is really a circle of history that goes on and on. And I think we should call us to rethink and question, why is it that always in response to crisis, the first thing we do is we point to others. We see how others may have led to our misfortune instead of reflecting on our own actions and again trying to deal with the consequences of it. And yeah, that was it. I really enjoyed the making of this video. Peaky Blinders is a brilliant series. I would highly recommend you watch it. I hope that you found that to be an insightful and entertaining video as well. If you have made it this far, firstly, thank you so much for watching the video. It also probably means that you're at least okay with the content you're seeing here. So please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot. And for the meantime, please check out this video for more of the similar good stuff.